Welcome again to the media ministry of Covenant of Grace Bible Church. This week, Pastor Mark continues his series in the book of Romans as we look once more at the question, what have we been saved for? So let's get your Bibles, open up to the first chapter of Romans, be ready to follow along with Pastor Mark.
A woman had been diagnosed with a terminal illness, and she was told by her doctor that she did not have very long to live. And so she called her pastor to discuss the funeral arrangements. The pastor came over, they began to talk about her arrangements, and at the end of this discussion, they had pretty much everything planned, and the pastor was getting up to say a final prayer with her and leave, and she deliberately took his hand, she looked into his eyes, and she said, "Pastor, one more thing." And the pastor sat back down, and he looked at her, and he said, "Yeah, what is it?" She said, "When I'm in the casket, I want you to make sure that someone puts a fork in my right hand before the people come by to view my body." The pastor kind of looks at her, and she says, "Here's why, Pastor." She says, "Every time I go to a church social or a church dinner, before the dinner dishes are cleared and before they bring dessert, the host invariably always says, 'Hold your fork, the best is yet to come.'" She said, "When those people go by my casket and they look at my body and they see that fork in my right hand and they look at you with what? I want you to tell them, the best is yet to come." The best is yet to come. You know, in Romans 1:16, that's where we've been using as our springboard the last few weeks as we move through Romans, and we've gone on one long rabbit trail. But the reason we went on the rabbit trail is because Romans 1:16 tells us that the gospel is the power of God for salvation, right? It's the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes. And we ask the question, what are we saved from? And what are we saved for? You know, you ask the common garden variety, ordinary Christian, what are you saved from? And you're going to get a variety of answers. So I think I'm saved from myself and my own disillusionments in life. Oh man, I tell you what, hell's a lot hotter than your own disillusionments in life. You're saved from the wrath of God. And they say, "Oh yeah, the wrath of God toward my sin." No, the wrath of God towards you because of your sin. That's what you're saved from. Now, for this message to really hit home today, it would have been good to have heard that message. Who we are saved from. The very first thing that we are saved from is not a thing, it's a person, it's God. We're saved from God by God. We are saved from Him and His anger and His fury and His wrath toward us for our sin. But not only are we saved from God and from a penalty of eternity in hell, we are saved for something as well. We are saved to enjoy God. We're saved from God's wrath so that we can enjoy God. You know, you want to ask yourself, what has God saved me to do? You know what God has saved you to do? To enjoy God. God has saved you to enjoy Him. He's saved us for many different things. And today, we've come through all these different things, and today we're going to look at the best, which is yet to come. You know, bad things happen to people who don't pursue and enjoy God as life's ultimate pleasure. Deuteronomy 28. Moses told the people as he quotes God, "If you don't serve the Lord with what? Gladness, bad things are going to happen to you." Bad things happen to Christians who don't want to serve the Lord with gladness and find Him to be their greatest pleasure and treasure in all of life. And that's why in Jeremiah chapter 2, verses 11 through 13, I'm just giving you the review now, so if you want to go there, it's fine, but we're just covering territory that we've covered the last few weeks. That's why in Jeremiah 2, verses 11 through 13, when God isolates all of the sins of His people, He boils them down to just two sins. Now, I could go for that. Yeah. Man, Lord, if you would take my whole life and boil all my sins down and you can get them down to 2, I like that. That's cool. That'd be great. But you know what the 2 sins are He boils them down to? And it's not so cool. It's this. Number 1, forsaking Him as the fountain of all joy and all pleasure, and then replacing Him with inferior, temporary, sinful, guilt-laden, empty treasures and pleasures of our own making. And God says when He isolates all the sins of all the people down to just 2, that's where it is. You know, the greatest sin in the world, and I believe the source of sin. I know you've all heard all your life, well, pride is the source of all sin. I gave you the message why I told you I disagree with that. I think pride is a symptomatic thing. The greatest sin in all of the world is to try and find your joy and your pleasure apart from God. That's the greatest sin. And that's the source of all sin. Every time you and I sin, the reason why we sin is because we think we'll find more pleasure and more joy and more significance in that act than we will find in obeying the Lord. That's why we always sin. Because we are always pursuing that which we believe will give us more joy and more happiness and more significance. We always do that. That's how we're wired. The greatest sin is trying to find your happiness apart from God. Does God want us to be happy? Yes, He does. But He wants us to be happy in Him. And He wants us to be happy with Him. In any situation, no matter how unpleasant that situation may be, we can still find our happiness and our joy and our pleasure in God. And so when God boils down the sins of His people, He says, you know what, here's the problem. You have forsaken Me, the fountain of all joy, and you are trying to produce your own joy with fruitless joys, inferior, temporary pleasures that are going to only leave you empty. We saw last week that the reason why death is gain and very much better for the believer than remaining here on earth is because in heaven we are going to be able to see God and experience firsthand the unspeakable pleasure of being able to gaze for all of eternity on His majestic grandeur. We get to see God, and that's what we talked about last week. But this week, what I want us to take a look at is what is going to be the absolute best about heaven, and thus what will be the absolute best about dying. The gospel is the power of God to save us who believe it to be with God in perfect, undiminished, and ever increasingly joyful, exciting, and exhilarating personal, physical fellowship for all of eternity. The gospel is the power of God to save us to be with God and to enjoy God for all of eternity. Thus, for us who believe, the best is yet to come. Now, there are many reasons why people want to go to heaven. There's many reasons why Christians want to go to heaven. Some of you are looking forward to seeing your parents. You're looking forward to seeing a brother or a sister, maybe a child, maybe a dear friend. You're looking forward to that reunion that you will have in heaven, and there's nothing wrong with that. I look forward to seeing my dad when I go to heaven. I look forward to seeing a dear uncle when I go to heaven. I look forward to that reunion, and some of you, that's what heaven is going to be, reunited with someone that was very dear to you and is very dear to you. Others can't wait to see what life without sin is going to be like. Can you imagine being able to think one simple thought without sin interfering in it for a nanosecond? Because we can't do that. To be motivated completely by pure holiness. I mean, that for me is going to be an exhilarating experience. Some of you are looking forward to life without tears and pain and loss. Others just can't wait to put on a pair of running shoes and try out the streets of gold. I mean, man, let's see how they work. I hope it's kind of like one of those moving sidewalks that just kind of moves you along. I'll get a good time. Regardless of all the reasons why we want to go to heaven, the one thing in heaven, the one thing which will absolutely eclipse every other reason for wanting to be there is the simple fact that God is there. And that in heaven we will be with Him where He is, so that we can live life with Him for all of eternity. Now, it's not that Jesus is not with us right now. Jesus is with us as we live our lives through His Spirit. The Bible tells us that. But even though Christ is with us and always with us spiritually, we are not physically or spatially with Him. And the fact of the matter is, God created us as physical, spatial beings. And obviously, He wants us to continue to be physical, spatial beings, or He wouldn't give us a new body, would He? We're created to have a body. Even when we go to heaven, we're created to have a body, so that we can experience things through a body. And that's why heaven is going to be so much better. And that's why we long for heaven. We long for heaven. And if you're a Christian, you should long for heaven. And if you're not longing for heaven, it very well could be that you're not living the kind of Christian life that brings the kind of pressure in your life that you would long for heaven. Because when you're living the kind of Christian life that brings pressure into your life from unbelievers and from every other source, there's a longing for heaven. You know, one of the reasons why I long for Sunday mornings is I get to be with believers. You know, when I was in the service, I couldn't wait. When I was in the service, I would have lived in church if I could have. Because that was my one place of rest, to get out of the barracks. And all the unbelievers and all their talk and all their actions and everything they were doing. And man, Sunday could never come too fast for me. And Sunday night, man, I was there. And Wednesday night I was there. I was there every time those doors were open. And I'll tell you why I was there every time the doors were open. I was there because that was my place of rest, being with God's people, before I went back out into the barracks and into the world and had to fight the battles. And man, I tell you what, Lord, you bring heaven any day. Any day, I'm ready to go. I talked to Mark. He tells me the same thing. I said, is it a good day to die? That's how we end our conversation. Is it a good day to die? You say, you're morbid. No, I'm not. You all ought to ask, is it a good day to die? Because if you can't answer that question, it's not a good day to die. I say, is it a good day to die, Mark? He says, it's a good day to go to heaven, Dad. I said, that's it. I know what he means. I know what he's talking about. If we're not longing for heaven, there's probably a reason why. Our longing for heaven is nothing less than a longing to be with God so as to experience and to enjoy God's presence with us. And the fact of the matter is that heaven would be hell if God were not there. Heaven would be hell if God were not there. Or if He were there and we could not see Him or be with Him. And just as true, hell would be heaven if God were there. What makes the difference are not golden streets or flames of golden fire. What makes the difference is, in one place, God's goodness through His presence of glory is there. In the other place, His wrath and His anger and the absence of His goodness is there. The Puritan preacher Samuel Rutherford, who spent many years in prison, he actually shepherded his church through letters. Because he spent so much time in prison. He'd preach the gospel and go to prison. Be put in exile in prison. And he said this, "O my Lord Jesus Christ, if I could be in heaven without Thee, it would be hell. And if I could be in hell and have Thee still, it would be heaven to me. For Thou art all the heaven I want." Martin Luther said the same thing when he said, "I had rather be in hell with Christ than be in heaven without Him. Because that's what makes heaven heaven. It's Christ. Being with and seeing God is the heart and the soul of heaven. Thus, again, our longing for heaven is really a longing for fellowship with God that we know exists. We know that that fellowship exists with God. I mean, is there anyone in here that is satisfied with your fellowship with the Lord? You couldn't raise your hand because you'd have to be dead and in heaven, okay? Because if you're alive, you can't be satisfied with it. Because there's always a greater hunger, always a greater thirst, always a greater pursuit. Because it's pointing to heaven, where we will see Him and be with Him and experience Him in a way that we can't while we are on this earth, operating by faith rather than by sight. That's why Jesus spoke to the believing thief on the cross, or when He spoke to the believing on the cross. This is why He did not say, "Today you shall be in paradise." That's not what He said, did He? What did He say? "Today you shall be" what? "With me in paradise." Why? It wouldn't have been paradise without being with Jesus. That's why in John 17:24, look at that. Look at John 17:24. Enjoy this, because next week we come back to Romans 1:18 and we talk about the wrath of God again. John 17:24. Jesus praying to His Father, He ends the prayer and He says, "Father, I desire that they also whom You have given Me be where I am." Is that what it says? It says, be what? With Me where I am, so that they may see My glory which You have given Me. For You loved Me before the foundation of the world. That's why in John 14:3, flip over there as long as you're in John. Look at John 14, verse 3. Look at what Jesus says. "If I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you to Myself, that where I am, there you may be also." Look, it would have made all the difference in the world if Jesus just would have said, "Listen, I will come again and receive you, that you may be there also." Well, Jesus, if you're not there, I don't want to go. Because I want to go where You are. And that's what Jesus said, didn't He? He said that You can be where I am. 2 Corinthians 5:8. Remember when Paul said that he preferred to be absent from the body so that he could be at home? Is that all he said? How did he end that? To be at home with the Lord. Whenever the Bible talks about being in heaven, the main emphasis is on being with Christ, being with God. Because heaven would not be heaven if God were not there. You know, the longer I live, the more I realize, and I'm sure you are as well, that there is no activity, no endeavor, and actually no person for that matter, no matter how pleasurable or exciting or rewarding, that is able to capture my attention and my affections forever. Nothing. Those things that when I was younger I thought would give me joy and pleasure forever, every day of my life, you know what? They don't. There's absolutely nothing on this earth that captures my affections forever. Nothing. You know why? It's not rocket scientist kind of stuff, but let me tell you why. It was never meant to. It was never meant to. There is nothing on this earth that was ever meant to capture your affections and your joy forever. Everything on this earth was meant to point you to the one who can. Nothing can capture your affections and your attention forever. We've all had the experience of enjoying a vacation to the full, only to find that once we have enjoyed it to its fullest capacity, we are ready to do what? Go home. Why am I not in Alabama on the Gulf right now? Where I was a few weeks ago, enjoying the Gulf of Mexico to the full. Eating that good food, Cajun food, shrimp, and all those things, and enjoying the sun, and enjoying the beach, and enjoying the water, and the peace and quiet, and no telephone, and enjoying my family. Why is it that after a while, it's like, I think I'm ready to go home to Dry Gulch? We've all had the experience of enjoying something like a concert or a sporting event or an outing with friends that just thoroughly captivates us, only to grow tired of it after we've exceeded our capacity to continue enjoying it. Usually happens to me about 9:30. Yeah, or as soon as I sit in my chair. That chair's got a magical quality about it. In other words, after a while, regardless of how much fun anything is to begin with, given enough time doing it and enjoying it, everything has a tendency to become familiar, boring, unpleasurable, and even undesirable. Everything. This is because there is absolutely nothing that has been created that has the ability or the capacity to satisfy you forever, not even in heaven. Not even in heaven. Only God has the ability to satisfy us forever, and that is why heaven will always be ever increasingly satisfying, fulfilling, enjoyable, exhilarating, exciting, and awe-inspiring, because God is there. If God were not there, you would even get tired of heaven. Because God is the only one who can satisfy us forever. Look at Psalm 17, verse 15. Psalm 17, verse 15. Look what the psalmist said. David said this. He had a real handle on this. As he comes to the end of Psalm 17, he writes this: "As for me, I shall behold your face in righteousness. I will be satisfied with your likeness when I awake." There's a whole group of scholars out there who say that the Old Testament writers really did not have a handle on eternity or the afterlife. In fact, that really wasn't their emphasis. I beg to differ with you. I don't know what in the world, this is talking about. If it's not talking about heaven, he's talking about that when he resurrects, he is going to be satisfied with God's likeness. When he resurrects, when he goes into the presence of the Lord and he sees the Lord, he is going to be satisfied with his likeness. Now, the word satisfied comes from the Hebrew word sabah. Sabah means to be excessively satisfied with an overabundance. And so what he's saying is this: as for me, I shall behold your face in righteousness. He had that expectation. He had that hope. I'm going to see you. And I will be satisfied, excessively satisfied, with an overabundance when I see your likeness. Now, what David is actually saying is this: that when he sees the Lord in heaven, he's going to find himself to be satisfied beyond his capacity to be satisfied. In other words, there will be more to take in than he has the ability to take in. Now, that is good. Don't you always like it when you go to the refrigerator and your favorite leftover is in there, and it's not just like one little piece of the chicken nugget, that the kids missed, but the bowl is brimming over? I love excess. I like it to be abundantly overflowing beyond my capacity. My big struggle with potlucks, like prayer meetings, I look at the food that comes in, and I look at all the people that are there, and sometimes I think, boy, I don't know we're going to have enough. And I'll always whisper to Nance, you think we got to run to Smith's and get some chicken or go do some of this and, add to the pot a little bit? But, it always seems to go, doesn't it? But see, again, I want abundance. I want excess. I want to be satisfied beyond my ability to be satisfied. And David says, listen, when I resurrect and I go to heaven, I will find that there is more to take in when I look at the Lord than I can take in. There's going to be more satisfaction, more pleasure, more joy, more happiness than I even have the ability to take in. And wouldn't that be true with an infinite God and a finite person? Don't make the mistake of thinking that when you get to heaven, you're going to become infinite, because you're not. You're going to be finite. And God is still infinite. Note that the satisfaction he's talking about has nothing to do with anything that's in heaven. He doesn't say, I'll be satisfied with streets of gold when I awake, or I'll be satisfied with a perfect sinless nature when I awake. He says, I'm going to be satisfied with you, looking at you. That's all it's going to need to do it for me. Listen, it's important to realize that the only thing that can limit our enjoyment in and with heaven, we talked a little bit about this last week, and in particular our pleasure when we see God, is our own limited capacity to take Him all in. That's what's going to limit us. And as we stated last week, that which expands our capacity to take more of God in and to see more of God and to enjoy more of God is what? Holiness. What did Jesus say in Matthew 5:8? Blessed are the what? Pure in heart, for they shall what? See God. That's a universal truth that is as true on earth as it is in heaven. That which limits our capacity to see and enjoy God is our own personal holiness. That's why holiness equates to happiness. And that's why when you're not holy, you're not happy. Because holiness expands your capacity to see and to enjoy God. That's why sin is such a joy stealer. That's why sin is such a thief. Because it not only steals your joy now, it steals your capacity for pleasure and happiness and joy in heaven. Now, as we said last week, everybody that goes to heaven is going to be as happy as they possibly can be. And if your cup is this big, you're going to be as happy as that little cup can possibly be. But if you've lived holy life, you've been pursuing holiness as a Christian, you've been pursuing the spiritual disciplines, you have a passion for God, and you go to heaven and your cup's this big, you're going to be as happy as that big cup can be. This person's going to be as happy as he can be. You're going to be as happy as you can be. Everybody's going to be as happy as they possibly can. But there will be people in heaven who have the capacity for more joy and more pleasure and more happiness because they have the capacity for more God. And it's the same with us right here. That truth is a universal truth. Thus, those who enter heaven with a greater degree of personal holiness, we're always going to have a greater capacity to enjoy and be satisfied by God in heaven. And that's why it's so important to pursue holiness. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. And they'll continue to see Him in greater and greater ways. Now, whereas only God has the ability to satisfy us for all of eternity, God does desire, now here's the rest of the stuff that some of you're waiting for. God does desire, and He does enable us to enjoy Him through a variety of secondary derivative pleasures, so that in heaven we will enjoy God in everything and everything in God. Okay, we are going to enjoy God in everything and everything in God because God's going to allow us to enjoy secondary pleasures. Streets of gold, being able to go out and see everything He's created, being able to fulfill dreams that we never were able to fulfill on this earth, being able to enjoy reunions with loved ones that have gone on before us. I mean, all of those are secondary derivative pleasures. And God's going to allow us to enjoy all these things. Look at Psalm 16:11. Psalm 16:11. The Bible has a lot to say about heaven. It's just scattered everywhere. You'd have to do an exposition of the whole Scriptures in an hour, probably be long enough for most of you. Psalm 16:11. You will make known to me the path of life. In your presence is fullness of joy. In your right hand there are pleasures forever. Now, the psalmist is saying to us, listen, it's in God's presence that you experience the fullness of joy, the fullness of pleasure, the fullness of happiness. And vice versa, you turn that around, you don't experience true joy apart from the presence of God. It's impossible. And so God enables us through His presence to enjoy all kinds of things. And look what it says at the end of the verse. In your right hand there are pleasures forevermore. God says, I've got all kinds of pleasures for you to enjoy. And so when we die and we go to heaven to be with the Lord, all the barriers between us and God will be forever gone, so that in accordance with the degree of our capacity and our ability to see and to enjoy God, we will also enjoy everything else heaven has to offer us. But again, it's important to realize that apart from being with and enjoying God, we would enjoy nothing in heaven. We'd enjoy nothing in heaven. The reason for this is that all of heaven's pleasures and joys, just like earth's, are derivative pleasures and joys. In other words, they have no ability to provide pleasure to anyone apart from being enjoyed